It's funny because every time you talk about Hellhead, that's our only really big family vacation we've ever had. So I think about our, we love it there.
I'm already.
They have those owners meeting once.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna be forced to go.
Oh, that's
Something that comes up that's really
Sure,
important.
let's
I
do
mean,
it
I
now.
would be gonna vote.
I agree. You need to be there.
I know we went to.
Okay.
We didn't know what roundabouts were.
Yeah.
Right, so,
Yeah.
we just go around, my brother said, I'm getting busy.
Yeah.
We finally figured them out. Oh, yeah.
Okay, we are studying the book of Revelation. We are in chapter 13. If you would be turning there, we'll continue where we left off on our last session. But before we get into the lesson tonight, just stop for opening word of prayer. Roger, would you lead us in the opening prayer, please?
Father, we thank you for tonight. We've been able to come now to open up your word, to glean from what we need, to be the person that we want to be. Father, we pray that you would be with Dave as he directs our minds this evening. You will be with all the rest of the teachers, Father, as they prepare in such a way that we all might learn together the will of Christ for our lives. Pray that you be with all the sick, Father, that can't be here this evening. Pray that you will bring encouragement, bring strength, and bring healing, Father, in a physical way. Father, we pray that you will bring in the spiritual way healing to those that know not Christ this hour, especially immediate families of members and things like this. Pray that your word will convict, Father, their hearts, that they might want to know Christ and be immersed in the waters of baptism, that their sins might be washed away and swept clean sweep. All of this we ask in the blessed name of Jesus this evening. Amen.
Amen. Okay, again, if you have a Bible, Revelation 13, we're going to start with about verse 5 in a little bit. But just as a sort of intro as to where we are in chapter 13. In chapter 13, we are introduced to the first of two beasts. Both of them are going to be mentioned here, but the first one is mentioned starting in verse 1. That beast is a beast that has great power, great authority. That's described by the concept of the animals that are represented, dangerous animals. In the description, the horns represent again the power. The 7 heads are the probably referring to the 7 Caesars that would have been represented up to this point in time. We talked about the mortal wound, mentioned a little bit. There are several theories as to what this mortal wound might refer to. There was actually a thought that was propagated among the Romans that one of the Caesars had died, and I believe it was Nero, and that Nero had resurrected in a different form, although it was still Nero. A second idea here is that the mortal wound was the death for a period of time of the persecution of Christians. Nero was the first of the Caesars that really began to persecute Christians. Nero committed suicide, probably set the city of Rome on fire. A lot of other history there that we could reveal. But At Nero's death, his son Vespasian became the emperor, and he was not as a voracious attacker of the Christians. But he had two sons, and those two sons began to, again, heavily persecute Christianity again, one of them being Domitian. So is that what the mortal wound and then the resurrection is talking about? That the persecution of Christians died off for a little bit, but then was regenerated whenever Nero comes to power. That's, again, a theory, it's a possibility. The idea is then, though, that we want to see that the point being, number one, there is a power that is against Christians. This power that is against Christians is given authority or power by Satan to do the things that this beast is doing. Next, we need to understand that it is a very dire situation. Who can stand against this beast? Is God in control? Would God allow all of this persecution, all of this death, if there was a God? So again, it may create doubt in the minds of the believers. So we have this constant need to reinforce our faith with God. That again, no matter how bad things get around us, God is still in control, even though we might not be able to see it at the time. And that's a tough pill to swallow. If you're in a situation where troubles and trials are coming your way, you ask the question, why me, God? Why me? And so because of that, we see that if it got to the point of persecution, I am trying to live a faithful Christian life, and people are trying to kill me simply because I'm a Christian. You would maybe seriously doubt whether God was in control. But all of this is to point to the idea that God is in control. Now, we're going to be looking at a time frame here, and that's what the next paragraph is about. We're going to start. Any questions on the first paragraph in chapter 14, 13 that goes down through verse 4? All right, let's read more about the first beast. And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints, and to conquer them. And authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation. And all who dwell on earth will worship it, except everyone whose name has not been written before the foundations of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword must he be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. Now, no matter what we interpret the beast to be, the conclusion at the end is the point that we need to understand. And that is, this message is being delivered that Christians might endure and that they might remain faithful. So, again, we talk about who is the beast. The beast, in my estimation, is talking about Rome, the authority of Rome. It is a worldwide power, as is identified here in this context that that it is an authority over every tribe and people and language and nation. Again, Rome is the unchallenged authority and power in the world at this period of time. All right? Again, we look at other periods of history, and we look at a powerful nation rising to power, seemingly unstoppable, and yet they are stopped. This beast comes to power at the early stages of Christianity. And again, the question is, can man stop the beast? And the answer is no, man cannot, but God can. And so we see now, although it appears to have unending power, its power is going to come to an end. In what period of time? 42 months. All right? Sound familiar? We've been talking about that in different ways at several times in the book of Revelation. What is 42 months? Well, it's 1,260 days. What's 1,260 days? 3.5 years. All right. See that consistent idea is found throughout the book of Revelation. So, again, we must understand it's not talking about a literal period of time. Why? Because the power of Rome lasted longer than 3.5 years. It lasted a lot longer than 42 months. So, what is the times and a half time, 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,260 days? What is that? It is an indefinite period of time. That's why it is half of 7. Right? 7 is a full number. It is a number represented as, in some way, God touching man. All right? God is in control of the situation. We see 7 churches of Asia. We see the 7 spirits. 7 is a number frequently used in the book of Revelation. It's complete. It is whole. It is controlled by God. But the half 7 is an incomplete number. And therefore, being incomplete, John is telling us that there is going to come, that the Roman Empire is going to come to an end. Now, he's not giving us a specific date, but he is giving us an idea that it is not all powerful and it's not going to continue forever. And again, there are books that have been written on the fall of the Roman Empire. What caused the fall of the Roman Empire? Why are these books written? Because Rome was such a powerful force in the world at this period of time. Have you ever thought, again, this is probably by God's design. Remember in the book of Daniel, we talked about the 4th kingdom, and that 4th kingdom is represented by the Roman kingdom. During that period of time, whenever God seems to be almost out of the picture, you understand the 4 images that are on the statue that Daniel sees are 4 worldwide governments. Where's God in that picture? You might think God disappeared. But then we have this stone coming out of heaven and hitting the base of this statue, which represents 4 world kingdoms. And they collapse. They are done. But God's kingdom, which is established during the reign or during the power of the 4th kingdom, which would be the Roman kingdom, that kingdom that God establishes is going to outlast all the others. It is going to be here forever. Promise of God. Now, again, we see the statue represented by either wealth or power, gold, silver, bronze, iron. But then we have this small stone. representing God's power coming from heaven that was able to collapse all the other Roman governments, all the other governments, and that God's government being built from this stone is going to last forever. So, again, the kingdom of God is going to be here forever. Whose authority? God's authority. God's power. Again, that is the statement that is made at the end of here about the telling of the beast and how powerful this beast is. It's got a time limit. God set the time. It's not going to last forever. It's going to be destroyed. Is Christianity ever going to be the dominating power of the world? Nope. Never promised to be. But God's kingdom is under the control of God, and God is going to protect those by a statement that is written here, and that is that their names are going to be written in the book of life of the Lamb. Now, if you believe in the concept that God predetermined or predestined each individual that was going to be saved, you would say, here, see, this proves the point that from the foundation of the earth, God had certain people in mind that he was going to save, and if you're not on that list, there's nothing you can do about it. You can't pray enough, you can't give enough money, you can't live a good enough life. There is nothing that you can do to change the outcome that God predetermined whether you may be saved or lost. That's not what this context is talking about. It's talking about the concept, and always has been talking about the concept, that God knows his faithful people. That's all it's talking about. So if you're faithful to God, and here's the interesting point, nobody else might know. Doesn't make any difference. The only person that has to know is God, and God in this passage says, I know you who you are because your name is written in the Lamb's book of life. So that's the context. That's the idea here that Rome is a powerful nation. And again, as we talked about before, the thought of the value of life is non-existent. If you are not in agreement with Rome, you're just another pawn that can be easily dealt with. You can be eradicated. Again, we see nations who have that idea. You know, hey, if the people don't agree, then you just kill the people. And that's the way Rome was. And how do you live in that society? How do you exist? How do you become and stay faithful to God in a society that says if you are a Christian, we're going to hunt you down, and if we find you, we're going to put you to death if you don't deny the power of God and the power of Christ. That's what they're facing. And that's why we have the writing of the book of Revelation. All right, thoughts on the beast? Anybody? Yes.
Just a comment, and that's from the quotation in Galatians 4:12 when it talks about when Christ came in the fullness of time. In other words, when things were right. And I think as we're reading this right now, we see that God had Christ come during this time. And although the Roman Empire had terrible effect on Christians, it also had it was also the way that Christianity got spread, because people learned about Christianity, and then I have to think a lot of them were Romans that moved to other countries and so on, because the influence of the Romans spread all the way to England at this time, all the way up there, which is a really long ways.
Yeah.
I think, especially back during those times. Yet it spread all the way, the influence of the Romans spread that far. So this was part of God's plan in Rome, what we're listening to today, and I have for several weeks, was part of that plan. Sometimes right now we're seeing the worst of it, but there were also some good things that came out of the Roman government and the Roman people and so on.
It's interesting to note, by the way, that the Roman government is not mentioned in the book of Daniel. I think we need to keep that in mind. I don't think there's any doubt that in the book of Daniel, the book of or the nation of Rome or the Roman Empire is not anticipated. I believe that's the Roman Empire completely and entirely. It's interesting to note that in the book of Revelation, the Roman Empire is not mentioned. But yet in the book of Daniel, it talks about a fourth kingdom. And by the way, the other three are mentioned by name, including the Greek kingdom, which wasn't even thought about during the time of the writing of the book of Revelation, book of Daniel, which was during the end of the Babylonian captivity into the Median and Persian empire. So two empires Daniel lived to see. The third one was on the far horizon, the Greek Empire, but he saw it. And then he mentions a fourth kingdom whenever God was going to establish his kingdom. And without a doubt, we know now that the establishment of the kingdom of Christ happened during the Roman Empire. So I think it's rather intriguing that in the book of Daniel and in the book of Revelation, the Roman Empire is clearly identified, but yet never mentioned in either book. All right, just a thought. Yeah.
So then the Roman Empire wasn't in existence then?
No, Rome was a bunch of city-states, just like Greece at the time. Greece was no world power. Greece was, again, a far thought on the horizon. And it's not until we get, again, we see some people might call it the coincidence of history. It wasn't coincidence. This was the providence of God. God had this planned out that there were going to be 4 world kingdoms. And the fourth one, God was going to establish his kingdom, and that kingdom would never come to an end. But that kingdom is different because it's not a world kingdom. It doesn't have territory. We don't fight in the Christian army. We don't go out and, as Christianity at one time thought. You hear about the Crusades? That was a mistaken notion. The Christians got to go out and fight, literally fight the Muslims, the Islamic faith. Where'd that come from? Not from God. Because God said we don't fight worldly battles, but we do fight battles. And what are those battles? It's a battle of morality. It's a battle of Christianity. Living the Christian life every day. That we don't kill our enemies. We try to convert our enemies. Interesting. Yes?
This isn't a question on the topic at hand, but how much, I can read the Revelation, I don't know how many times I've read it, but John himself, how much of what he was writing did he truly understand?
Does he understand? Well, I don't have John telling me that.
Really, I've often thought, which is, he was aware of everything he was writing. I mean, the Holy Spirit gave him all this knowledge.
It would be guesswork on our part. I think what's intriguing is, and maybe in answer to your question, but again, it's just supposition. That is, later on, John is told to write all these things down, but there is a something that John sees, and as he begins to write it down, like he was told, write everything down that you see, all of a sudden the Spirit says, no, don't write that down. Leave that to the ages to come. Was that the revelation that this is the Roman Empire and everything? I don't know. Again, with the information that John is writing, I think John understood that the beast is the Roman Empire. I think he understood that. But again, that's supposition on my part. Okay.
I'm just going to say the other books written by other people, we know that Paul interacted with Peter and a lot of the other people in James and so on. But when John's writing this Revelation, he's by himself on the isle. He's not having interaction with other apostles or so on, or other, probably no other Christians, because this is a really remote island that he's put on. And
For that intended purpose.
that's,
This is what we would call solitary confinement on an island. I mean, he is, the intention is we don't want you interacting with anybody at all. If there were Romans on the island, then they were probably told, don't even talk to them. Don't even talk to them.
Well, and there's, you probably with it, Robert, one of the talks is that he didn't write it, he wrote it after it. So that's another, I'm not saying I believe that, but that is one of the theories, is that it came afterwards.
Yeah.
After he left.
Possible. But
I don't,
I think I had a tendency to believe he died as a martyr, but he was not put to death. He just allowed to die in isolation. That's my opinion. Okay, I don't know. All right. Yeah, right.
I believe that last verse of that context, where it says this calls for patient endurance and faithfulness. Of course, when you go back to chapter 2, John says, you got to be faithful up until the point of your death. Going back to this example of the martyrs under the altar. How long, Lord? How long? Now, hold on. You gotta hold on. Be faithful.
And by the way, you tell what it's talking about in the verses right before the last one here. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword must he be slain. What's that talking about? Christians. In the time right before the Babylonian captivity, Jeremiah was telling the people of Israel, you got to repent. Actually, by the time of Jeremiah was telling them it's too late to repent. God's already made up his mind. You are going to go into captivity. And he's warning them, when you go into captivity, you listen to what your captors have to say. You do what they tell you to do. Why? If not, they'll kill you. Now, if there's going to be a remnant remain, as Jeremiah talks about, then you people are going to have to listen to what the Babylonians tell you. Now, it's not going to be forever. It's going to be, the time frame here would be like 3.5 years. What does that mean during the time of Jeremiah? Jeremiah specified 70 years. All right, so that was different. He knew precisely. And he told the people, you're going to be in captivity for 70 years. You've got to listen to your captors, or else they're going to put you all to death. And there won't be any remnant. But God said there's going to be a remnant. Based upon what? Based upon the fact that, first of all, some of them were going to die. Some of them were going to die. If you put up resistance, when the Babylonians come, they're going to kill you. If you surrender and you become their vassals, their servants, they'll let you live. So what's your choice? Death or servitude? Doesn't sound very appealing, does it? What's this talking about? Same idea. Same idea. Some Christians are going to be taken as captives. And they're going to be in prison, maybe the rest of their lives, sort of like John. Some of them are going to be put to death in some of the most horrible ways imaginable. Nailed to crosses or tied to crosses and burned at the stake to light the city of Rome during the time of Nero. Thrown into the lion's den, into the arena as public entertainment. Watch the lions tear them apart. Throw them in with the gladiators and give the gladiators all kinds of weapons and armor and so on, and give the Christians maybe, if they're lucky, a small weapon to defend themselves without any body armor. Just to see, maybe their God will come and save them. You understand? This was a horrible period of time for Christians. But what is John telling them in this context? Some of you are going to be taken captive. Some of you are going to be put to death. And again, the reference to the martyrs underneath the altar crying out. Again, the answer to them is, hang on. More of you have to die. How do you want to be part of a religion that your God is telling you it won't last forever? But before we get to the end, a lot of you are going to die. So maybe I'll go out and change religion. That's the idea. That's what he's saying here. You can't be like one God. There is only one God. And that God is the only one who can save. No one is promised life on this earth for eternity. Now, let me, sometimes we don't think of death normally because we don't like to think about death. But we're all going to die. Now, let me pose a question to you. We are about 2,000 years removed from the events that John's writing about. 2,000 years. All right? What if there was no persecution by the Roman government? Where would those people be today? Still dead, right? Still dead, right? So it makes no difference whether you die as a martyr or whether you die a peaceful rest sleeping in the middle of the night. You're going to die. So the point is not the way we die. Now, again, we don't like to think about persecution and about death being forced upon us, but death is not the enemy that we have to worry about. The enemy we have to worry about is Satan. And doing what Satan is telling me to do. Surrender, give up, turn your back on God. That's what Satan is trying to get us to do. So we're going to die. So the only question is, how do you want to die? Basically, I don't want to die a painful death. I might end up dying a painful death. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is, am I faithful at the point of death? All right. Any further thoughts? Yeah, brother.
There's, you had your lesson on chapter 15, 1 Corinthians this past Sunday. So important there. Brings the hope that I have, that we have in play there. Got to think about that when we're studying God.
Yeah.
Especially this right here.
Yeah. Even again, it's even interesting to note how the book of Revelation starts off in chapter 1, whenever Jesus says, I was alive, but I was dead. Now, think about his death. That he may die peacefully in bed, sleeping. Very horrible death. So the point being, Jesus is saying at the very beginning, came to this earth to die a very painful death so that we might live. So Jesus is not doing, or Jesus is not asking us to do something that he himself would not do. He's already done it. So can we be faithful? He was faithful. Can we be faithful? The idea is we must be like Jesus and be faithful unto death. All right. Anything else there? Second beast mentioned. Looking at, starting in verse 11. Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had two horns, like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. It was allowed to give breath to those who would not worship. Jump the line there. Verse 15. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak, and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also, it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and enslaved, to be marked on the right hand of or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell written as the mark. That is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. All right. Certainly all heard the number before. Mark of the beast. All right. First of all, let's try to establish what is the second beast. If the first beast is Rome, what is the second beast? What do you say?
I said, that's a good question.
Well, I asked this.
Well, obviously, it's about religious, everything turns to where it becomes power, it becomes religion, it becomes worship, and whether that's your individual, which I don't think it is, I think it's more of a power. But, I don't know.
Okay. Any other guesses? Ideas? Thoughts? What is the second beast?
Christ?
Huh?
Is it Jesus?
Jesus? No, this is against God. This is number 666 is against God. Yeah.
The second beast, the first beast is the political arm of Rome. Is the second beast the religious part of where they wanted to be, the pillars wanted to be worshipped as a god?
I believe you got it. I believe that's what the second beast represents. Understand, at first, when the Roman government, again, keep in mind, the Roman government started off somewhat in the same concept that we have as far as political ideas. That is, you had a Senate. The Senate decided what person could do what, or what group of people could do what. They made the laws. All right. Later, they added a figurehead that was going to be identified as Caesar. Now, the problem was the Senate, because of laziness or whatever else, became less and less important, and the figurehead, Caesar, gains more and more power until we get to Augustus, recognized as the first real Caesar. Why? Because Augustus said the Senate is basically worthless. I'm going to lead us to power. And he does. Leads them to worldwide power. Now, that is okay for a while, but sooner or later we've got some problems down the road. Number one is succession. Whenever you have somebody as the figurehead or literal head of a government, the next question is going to be, okay, what happens when he dies?
Which you get.
Huh?
Which you get often.
We get it, don't we? Now, if the Senate was in control, it would be the Senate's responsibility to get rid of Caesar. But what now is Caesar has gained more power than the Senate? Whose choice is it going to be? Caesar. Now, how do you gain the trust of the people? Because they don't want to king. That's why they ever called him a king. It was only Caesar. I thought that was interesting. But now what do you have? You have a man who wants his family to succeed after him. But what do you have to convince the people? You have to convince the people that the gods are behind this. So what do? They ascribe not only to, well, Caesar did it himself, or at least got the idea that Caesar is not just a human being, but he is actually partially descended from the gods. Therefore, you have this divine nature behind Caesar. And in order to convince the people, you have to give more and more power to the divinity side. Because if you don't, he's just another man. So now, in order to propagate the idea that Caesar is a descendant of the gods, now what you have is that you need teachers, priests, going out proclaiming the fact that not only is Caesar a god, but Caesar needs to be worshipped as a god. So now we have the worship of Caesar.
Okay, so now I have to throw another wrench into this thing, and I'm sure that most of you have heard this, that there are those that believe that looking forward that they're talking about the first pope, because the pope is worshipped as God, that he himself is God. I heard that when I first obeyed the gospel of Christ. There were people that were advocating that in the late 60s, early 70s.
Well, there's one major problem with that. It comes along too late. It comes along much too late. The Pope doesn't come along until several hundred years after this, even though they claim the first Pope was back to Peter, which is not the case. It's immaterial.
Yeah,
The idea of the Pope does not come on the scene until later on. Whoever this entity is, this beast, it is here now during the first century. And what is it? I believe it is the worship of Caesar. Whenever Jesus was on his travels, one of the places he traveled to, and sometimes it becomes confusing because there are two Caesareas mentioned in the Bible. The one Caesarea is on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. That's where eventually Philip goes up, Philip has four daughters. They were prophetesses. All that happened up along the coast. But there was a place further inland that was called Caesarea Philippi. Now, what was intriguing about that? Because that is where Jesus asked the question, who do men say that I am? Why is he asking that question in this area, Caesarea Philippi? Because here was an area where there were multiple gods that were worshipped. This is not Judea. Far from it. There's not one God in this area. There are a bunch of gods. Included in Caesarea Philippi at this time was an altar for Caesar. And you had to pay homage to that altar, worshiping Caesar. All right. Is that what the second beast is? I'm pretty convinced of it. You may have other opinions on that. But I am pretty certain that's what the second beast is. This is the religious arm of the Roman government. By the way, it's the same body. You understand? Notice the terminology again. The dragon gives power to the first beast. What does the dragon do here? Actually gives it its voice. It sounds like the dragon. Who's the dragon, by the way? Satan. That's the devil. So the devil is behind this scheme to get people to worship the politicians. And they're in agreement to it. Why? What is the controlling factor here? And by the way, it is a powerful controlling factor.
You're gonna be able to live life, basically. You're not gonna be able to deal or buy or sell or.
You
have a
can't
job
buy.
or nothing.
You can't sell unless you come to the temple and you bow down before Caesar. So you don't get the mark. That's the identifying characteristic, the mark of the beast. Now it's placed on a prominent spot. You know, sometimes you go to an amusement park or whatever, and they put a band on you, or they stamp your wrist or whatever, let you know. You paid your fee. You're okay. You can go on in. All right? There would have been different identifying marks. In Russia, they had the Communist Party. You were allowed certain privileges if you were a card-carrying member of the Communist Party. So that would be the mark of the Russians, the Communist Party. So the identifying mark, whatever it is, now again, let's not get hung up on the number 666. We'll talk about that in a moment. Right now, it's just an identifying characteristic that said you have honored Caesar, you went to the temple, you bowed down before him, you probably threw in the collection plate when it came around. All right, so you have done your part as far as your worship to Caesar. Therefore, we're going to give you permission to go to the marketplace. You can buy, you can sell, you can trade, and you can do things. You don't have the mark of the beast, you're not allowed in the marketplace. Did that put a damper on what your plans might be? By the way, it is something that is extremely dangerous whenever the government gets in and says you can buy and you can't buy.
What did you say, we're already there?
What's that?
Oh, we're there.
We're
We're there.
You either get the vaccine or you don't.
Get the vaccine or you don't.
We're there.
Well, you don't have to, but if you don't want to live, if you don't want to have a job in the federal government, if you don't want to be a nurse, if you don't want to be what's included now, policeman and so on,
But you can be a postal worker.
postal worker.
Very expensive.
By the way, does that seem so far-fetched if they wouldn't have done something in the first century? If you didn't worship Caesar, they didn't care about it.
It's not even hard to do.
Not even hard to do. All right, they're coming in. We've got to stop. We'll talk more about the mark of the beast next time we get together, and especially that number, 666. It's a good number. That's not a good number. But
It's actually my favorite.
Hi, buddy. Hi, sweetheart.
Really fun.
What
Oh,
did you do?
You're full head there, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
yeah, I think that's the pretty cool about what the usual
That was not a little breeze. Oh, well, they still want to.
But it is, again, I think that's what we say, getting hung up on the details instead of looking at the end result. The end result is the detail. And if you can do that, you can do How many, what people Good evening, everybody. If you could mark in your hymnal number 525, we'll sing that after we hear the message. Number 525, we'll sing verses 1, 2, and 4 of that. And before we hear this evening's message, let's try and sing 502. 502. And we will sing the first and last verse. You know, I heard Willie Nelson sing this song and it's messed me up on this song. That's why I said I to lead it, because ever since I heard Willie Nelson's version, that's how I hear it now. So I want to sing it that way, but I'm not Willie Nelson for one. I don't think it's how it goes. So we'll give it a go. Are you weary? Are you heavy-hearted? Tell it to Jesus. Tell it to Jesus. Are you grieving over joys departed? Tell it to Jesus alone. Tell it to Jesus. Tell it to Jesus. He is a friend that's well known. You have no other such a friend or brother. Tell it to Jesus alone. Do you fear the gathering clouds of sorrow? Tell it to Jesus. Tell it to Jesus. Are you anxious? What will be tomorrow? Tell it to Jesus alone. Tell it to Jesus. Tell it to Jesus. He is a friend that's well known. You have no other such a friend or brother. Tell it to Jesus alone. That Bible, I'm going to be looking at some thoughts from Second Corinthians chapter 6. The book of 2 Corinthians is interesting, especially after reading the book of 1 Corinthians, which happened at least a year earlier than the writing of the second book of 2 Corinthians. But the problem is there was such a lot that happened in Corinth in a short period of time, to the point that many of them were rejecting the authority of Paul, that they thought of him less than what he, less powerful than he thought. Several times in the book he mentions the idea that the accusation is that when I am away from you, I'm a very strong and powerful person, but when I am with you, I show myself to be very weak. So we have this controversy in the congregation, at least it was for a period of time, to the point that Paul arrives at Corinth from Ephesus, taking a straight course there because he heard of the troubles that were there. And he is basically rejected from the congregation at Corinth. So he goes into Macedonia, up to the north of where he's at, writes a letter that caused them to grieve, that is mentioned in 2 Corinthians, I think chapter 5. We don't have that letter. We don't know what it says. He apologizes because he had to write the letter. He doesn't apologize for the contents of the letter because people responded appropriately. In other words, they repented of what they had done wrong to come to God. But now he is at the point where he needs to tell them, you've got to do something about your life. You've got to change your life. You've got to follow God. Because as we see here in the first couple of verses of chapter 6, he says, working together with him then, we appeal to you to receive the grace of God, not to receive the grace of God in vain. For he says, in a favorable time I listened to you, and in a day of salvation I have helped you. Behold, now is the favorable time. Behold, now is the day of salvation. I don't know if you thought about that day, but one day when we're standing before God, it'll be too late at that period of time to make up your mind what you're planning on doing. There are a lot of people today, when you talk to them, say, well, you know, I want to go to church, I want to be faithful to God, but I've got so much on my plate right now, I don't have the time or the energy or whatever it is. Well, when? When are you going to make that decision? Well, I don't know. Get around to it. And so they delay it, and they delay it, and they delay it. And then, for most of them, it ends up being too late. They've waited too long, and they stop. All right? The Bible says now, when you come to the conclusion that you must obey God, that's God prompting you to make a response. That is God announcing that there is a favorable time when I listen to you. There is a time coming when God's not going to listen to us anymore. The time to listen to God is now, because God is giving you the answer you're looking for. Today is the day of salvation. Not next week, not 10 years from now, but now. Someone comes to that statement and you're talking with them and say, well, maybe sometime. Write a date down for them. Write a date down. What is today? 22nd? September 22nd. All right, write down September 23rd in the year 3000. What? I'll be dead by then. Yeah? How do you know you're not going to be dead on September 23rd, 2021? We were getting something to eat, and Deb got a text or something on her email. A friend I'd known back in Congressville for many years passed away. I don't think he was planning on leaving this earth a couple of days ago, but he did. We don't know when that day is, but we do know when the day of our salvation is. And that's now. And that's today. If you haven't responded, we encourage you to do so. We can help you in that response. And please come forward as together we stand and sing this invitation.
If I walk in the pathway of duty, if I work till the close of the day, I shall see the great King in his beauty. When I've gone the last mile of the way, when I've gone the last mile of the way, I will rest at the close of the day. And I know there are joys that await me when I've gone the last mile of the way. If for Christ I proclaim the glad story, if I seek for his sheep gone astray, know there are joys that await me when I've gone the last mile of the way. And if here ever thusly stricken, and have tried always will to obey, till enhance all the rapture of heaven, when I've gone the last mile of the way. When I've gone the last mile of the way, I will rest at the close of the day. And I know there are joys that await me when I've gone the last mile of the way.
Good evening on this first day of fall. Not what we like to see, but can't see Mother Nature. Anyone have anything tonight?
So yeah, we have a little bit of news on Holly's dad. So the aneurysm is about 5 inches in size. So it's one of the biggest they've seen. They've decided to delay immediate surgery because I'm guessing two things: his overall health and the size of the aneurysm. They're going to bypass it and get blood around it and start medicating it and shrink it. And I think eventually they'll do surgery and remove it. But in the meantime, I think that's their game plan, and then that should happen. Yeah, there's a lack of beds, which is why they can't get him in right now. They're estimating maybe 2 weeks that we will get him in the hospital. So we ask for continued prayer.
Bryce is not here because he was a close contact, so he's been going there for a couple days.
One thing.
I would like to thank everyone for prayers for my father-in-law. He's doing much better.
What is that true?
Father in heaven, we thank you for another time we get to gather together. We pray that we would be strengthened by our meetings together, and that you would give us encouragement to continue the rest of the week. We thank you for all the blessings that you give us. We ask for strength. We ask for courage and boldness. We ask for love and compassion. And to go into the world, help us to love one another as you have loved us. And we ask that you would teach us how to love. We pray that you be with all those who are hurting more than we can imagine right now. But we know that you're still there. We know that you hear our prayers and you love us as your children. And through the name of Christ, we ask that you would heal the sick. We pray for peace in the world. We pray that we could be mediators of that peace. Pray for your kingdom to grow, and that your will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. Please watch over us as we continue the rest of the week. Through Christ we pray.
Oh, and one other thing, Joanne might have a big grandbaby. Hopefully, that's smart. And losing, well,
She's a couple of months. All right?
she's in the hospital now, so.